the fact that you don't need to focus on the means, and by means, that could mean learning to play an instrument, learning to sing, learning how to record. We're only in the beginning of understanding what that means. And there's something empowering about that. But I always think about when I am working with Emvoice, getting into Ableton in 2011, I was probably making the best ideas of my life because I was like 12 at the time. That feels like a period of time when I'm probably making music that is not as derivative as when you are twice that age. You're really interacting with just your mind.
Mm-hmm. We had a little powwow beforehand, and we have a bunch of topics for y'all to discuss. And this is going to be quite a different episode. And I'm really excited because typically I am educating and trying to have expert guests on, like attorneys and tour managers and all this. But Jacob has been a good friend of mine for many, many years since we wrote at Noise Porn, which is now defunct, RIP. And he has a really interesting philosophical view on a lot of artists' viewpoints and how art is perceived. And so we're going to get into all of that and kind of break those things up. And the takeaway from this episode that I hope from all of you is that you just take a little piece of nugget that one of us says and just kind of let it sit for a little bit. Let it form a roux and think about it and then make some decisions, because there's a lot of big points in here that are going to kind of take you back a second and go, wait a minute, that's actually a really good point. So when those things happen, write that down, step back, and kind of reevaluate and think what it is that you want to take from that comment and then move forward. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Jacob, I'm going to kick it over to you before we really kind of dive in. I want you to kind of give us a brief overview, like a 2 to 3 minute overview of who you are, what you've done, and then how you've gotten to where you are today.
Sure. That was a flattering introduction, first of all.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. I'm very happy that this is happening. I have been a music producer since downloading Ableton 8 in middle school. Getting an audio interface was kind of the beginning of the end for me, because that allowed me to make not just a guitar lick, not just a single instrument. The Skrillex era of music production, you can make an entire song. It can just be you now. It feels like that was the beginning of the 2010s. That was just when I got into production. I've been a hobbyist for a while. I went to music school, and there was a very big culture of collaborating with. If you had a producer, that producer would go to a singer and they would get into a studio together. That was just the serendipitous environment that you would be after. It would be one of those types of situations where if you are a producer, your skill set, best case scenario, can complement a singer's skill set, and that hopefully can be a mutual relationship. There would be a lot of groups where it would be female singer, male producer, or I don't know why I'm attaching gender to any of this. It would be a producer, it would be a singer. That was kind of the pre-COVID scene of music programs or music majors and minors in that world. Mm-hmm. COVID obviously killed all of that. So my history with Emvoice really starts as a user. I heard of it in November of 2019 when the first voice came out. And then over the course of the pandemic, became very dependent on it as a way to fill that void, I guess you would say, when it comes to collaborating. And I guess before I continue talking, I should probably explain what Emvoice is, because maybe that doesn't make any sense without any context. Emvoice is a vocal synthesis platform. Right now, there is a VST plugin where you enter notes and then you enter lyrics. And then let's say you enter 5 notes, you would enter 5 syllables of lyrics, and then the cloud server performs those lyrics for you. So it is a quick way of creating vocals without having to record or set up an audio environment. And you do not have to be a professional singer to create professional vocals. That is what Emvoice is. We sell voices. Our most recent voice is Keela. We are working on a new voice that should be ready pretty soon. And we have a lot of plans every decision we make is predicated on, does this make it easier for more people to create art? Which I think we could get into that in a bit more detail soon. But it feels like that. I'll let you What were you
Yeah.
going to say?
So I just wanted to stop you for just a second. For those who don't know,
Sure.
and for those who are like, how does this type of technology work? What does it mean when you're working on a voice, and what does it take for you to create a synthetic voice professionally, and getting the rights to that voice, and then how is it generated? Like, how do you train it? Like, kind of walk us through a little bit of the process so we can understand how these types of tools are being created.
Yeah, sure. The voices are made from real people. If you are listening to an MVoice voice, that is not generated without humans. Every
Okay.
single audio file you are listening to is a real person singing. That process is something that I'm not involved in close detail because I think my best role at MVoice is to allow the people that are in experts. I don't know why I keep saying in experts, people that are experts in this technology to focus specifically on that technology.
Got it.
I think my role is to allow them to go as deep as they can
Mhm.
into the research involved
Mhm.
with that. Does that answer your question at all? Was that a total non-answer?
No, no, that was good. You gave us kind of where you came from. Where did you grow up? Tell us about that.
I grew up in Pennsylvania. It is the part of Pennsylvania where it is close enough to New Jersey that I can identify with New Jersey when people are talking well about New Jersey, but I'm far away enough that I can say I'm not from New Jersey. So it totally depends on who I'm talking to, but it is the part of Pennsylvania that is practically it might as well be New Jersey.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
um,
Cool. Yeah. So growing up in Pennsylvania, what kind of music did you like and listen to?
I was. This is the. I know this is the most cliche answer of all time, but I was an everything person. I did
Okay.
listen to everything, but if you were someone talking about me at that time, it definitely would have been electronic music. I
Okay.
cannot deny that. M83, Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. That album was the that changed everything. I feel like that just opened up a whole. I feel like that album is the most underrated album of this century because I feel like so many people were inspired by that album in the years after it came out. And at this point, we're a few cycles away from it. I feel like most artists now are inspired by people who were inspired by M83, Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. And maybe they don't realize it, but that album changed everything for me. That was my light bulb moment, I guess.
Excellent. Well,
And then
I
that
like.
whole period of time was just very novel.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the format of electronic music had a novelty to it, and
Mhm.
that was kind of where I went from M83 Hurry Up We're Dreaming. It feels like
Cool.
that evolution took place around the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So I ask those questions because I like establishing like where people grew up and where they came from and what music they listen to because that typically forms a lot of their tastes and who they are, and then what career path they take when they get into the music industry. They typically, if they grow up listening to music, they go into working with electronic music. It's very rare that I've found that people kind of grew up listening to country music and then they go into like heavy metal music, like working in touring with a heavy metal band or that
Yeah,
type of stuff. So it's really fun to hear how people, what they listen to, what inspired them, and then what they do now as a professional. So that kind of segues into our next point is the M83 album was very pivotal and inspirational to you. And one of the talking points that we have is what makes artists or musicians art so resonatable, if that's a word. Um, so why does it resonate so well? And I think this is kind of where you kind of excel in what you were talking about in the document. What about the M83 album kind of resonated and then kind of segue into artists, art, and how that still to this day has not changed?
I guess I don't know why it resonated with me, and that's why I'm very excited about the future for artists, honestly,
Hmm.
because we can't really figure out why art resonates with people because it involves so much of you. Like what you were saying, it involves where you grew up. It involves the time at which you grew up. It involves childhood trauma. It involves every single thing that has ever happened to you in your life. It involves people that have lived in a given location at a moment of time. I can't honestly say with a confirm, like with a steady answer that I'm 100% certain why that resonated with me. It was different than anything coming out at that time. I feel like this was the period of time when indie rock was very big. Um, the millennial whoop. This is a songwriting trend that you will notice from that 2012, 2011, 2010. I think is a minor third. Fact check me on this, but I would recommend looking into the millennial whoop because this was the moment of time where that was basically every single song. So I imagine that that would have been one of the details that led me to listen to and enjoy M83's Hurry Up We're Dreaming because it borrowed from those songs of the time, but flavored them in a way that was very novel. It feels
Mhm.
like that is, to an extent, I don't want to say a formula because that makes this feel more scientific than it is, but feels like taking ideas that are proximate and then flavoring them in a way that is not at all
Mhm.
is a good way of retelling stories
Yeah.
when it comes to music. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if I'm going in a direction that you did not mean when asking that. I let me know if that made any sense.
Yeah, no, that was good because well, the thing is there's a lot of artists that come to mind, and I grew up we're probably similar in age, and I grew up in a similar scenario. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, up in Minnesota, and it was all country and rock music and pop music because that's really all we had access to. That was the radio, what they had, what was
Mm,
playing was top radio, and then country music, of course, because we lived out in the country. And that none of those things were really my thing. So I listen to a lot of dance music because I'm like, oh, this is different, and I like being different and not listening to what everybody else was listening to. So one of the albums that stuck out to me was Before the Storm by Darude, and that had his Out of Control. It had his Sandstorm, of course, on it, and that was one of those albums that like changed my life. Next to, I remember
yeah,
when I heard the song Sandstorm and it was being placed in a lot of shows and I was hearing it at sporting events and I was like, what is this damn song? We didn't have Shazam back then. We didn't have, you know,
yeah,
super complex phones to look up a song and anymore. So we didn't have that back then. So I remember looking and trying to find that CD on Media Center. There was a bunch of different like Staples or whatever Best Buy I could find to try to find that CD. And it's crazy because the art form has not changed. That album still resonates with me like it did 20 years ago. And I like the perspective that we were talking about before is how artists the job and the role of an artist is very similar than it was 20 years ago, but it's also very different because of the technology that's being used. So, and I think we're seeing this with a lot with artists. Like we can see Fred again, we see Skrillex, we see a lot of these bigger artists are starting to try different technologies. David Guetta is known for it as well. He famously dropped an Eminem sample. I think it was during one of his sets. I don't remember where it was at, but he dropped an AI generated Eminem sample in his set, and it was like David Guetta is on the verge of using these technologies to create the next thing. And so the artist, the fundamental value of an artist is to inspire moments of connection, I guess you could say. Like when you're listening, when you want somebody to listen to your music that you've created, what are you hoping they get out of it? Are you hoping that it inspires them, it motivates them? What is kind of the reason for doing that? And I think David Guetta does that. I think Skrillex does that really well. I think M83 does an incredible job of that. I think there's a lot of really, really good artists that do that in different ways. So, can you talk about? I know this was kind of a loaded answer from me, but talk about how you've seen the artists that maybe you grew up with are kind of the fundamental role is similar, but they're still innovating today.
yeah. Well, to you mentioned Darude Sandstorm. The reason I would estimate that that song resonated so much at the time, I think it was 2002, 2003, somewhere around then. That was a bit before my time, but I would imagine that a big reason why it resonated at that time is because nothing sounded like it. Now it resonates with people because they hear it at stadiums, because they hear it at sporting events. But the reason they hear it at those stadiums and sporting events is because of the way it landed in 2002, 2003. Just such a novel sound, which, as far as I can tell, that's kind of the best possible thing that can happen to your art, because in a way it immortalizes you. Whatever mood you were trying to convey, whatever aesthetic, whatever you were trying to communicate that you couldn't put to words, artists tend to emerge as a reason of not being able to put it to words. They tend to put it to music instead.
Mhm.
So whatever meaning that would have had then is entirely different from now, which is, but the only reason it's allowed to sustain this long is because it was so impactful at that time. I feel like time sensitivity to art is something that we don't, like, we're all aware of it, but I don't know if we know what to do with it. If that makes any sense. Like I don't know if this is derivative of what you just said, basically, about the role of an artist. But to an extent, that is one of the major purposes of art, is communicating something that you can't convey by text, by language, by written data, which is the thing that gives me optimism right now when it comes to a lot of the technologies that have presented themselves over the course of this year, because it feels like a lot of the discourse is, who is this going to displace? And yes, the instruments are going to change in ways that I don't even like. I would be lying if I said I know what a DJ set is going to look like in year 2033. I know in 2013 it was very similar to what it is currently. There's something exciting about not knowing where things are going to go for me. That's a bit of a side note, but maybe the better way to articulate what I'm saying about being slightly optimistic at the moment is, how on earth can we make databases, knowledge bases, trainable resources for AI if we can't understand what it is that we are putting in them? Like, we can predict, I would imagine, what would have resonated in 2013 now, because we're 10 years out from 2013. It is in retrospect. We know exactly what happened pretty much at every single second of every single day in 2013. We can map it out now because it already happened. If we can't communicate what we are trying to communicate in ways that are not art, as far as I can tell, that's the most human. We're trying to represent something that we can't define because it is so human. It is so innate. It's so primal. Like, if you have, like, okay, you mentioned Fred again. I would imagine, I'm really not, I'm not like a musicologist, which is, it's funny that we're having this conversation, because don't consider me to be like trained in understanding the depths of this. But you look at his come up, and you look at the time when it happened. It was as we were leaving COVID. It was as we were starting new events again, with the traumas, with the experiences, with whatever happened during those years. And you hear people say all of the time, everything feels different now. You go to a live event, the songs are different. He captured whatever it was that was resonating with so many people at that time. And I imagine that as a result of resonating to that extent, he will be played in year 2033. And people who are listening to We've Lost Dancing for the first time in 2033 might have an entirely different meaning than someone in 2021 would have. But that's, again, kind of the best case scenario for your art, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Is to be kind of like mortified, and like, not mortified, but like put into stone and like monumentalized, like to have your music resonate in 20, 30, 40 years and still be big and relatable. I mean, I was just on a conversation the other day where we look at like Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill, her placement in
Hmm.
Netflix's Stranger Things. That song is over 40 years old. So, and to see like now that song has been brought from a completely different time zone, slapped into one of like the most CGI like futuristic shows and completely relevant and relatable to the viewers of today. And now these people know who Kate Bush is, the song from 30 years ago. And that song has a completely maybe different meaning to these people than it does the people that originally heard it when it had first come out. Um, but it's
We got to
still
get Kate
able
Bush
to.
on the show.
I know we need to get Kate Bush on the show, but to be able to have that form of impact is really huge. I think, like, thinking about it, being able to take a song that was written 40 years ago, like, the world was in a very different place economically, globally, politically, climate, socially, and now we place that song into today, and it resonates just as much, if not more, because of the reach that it has using the technologies that we have available to us today. But the reason that taste is so different is because everybody's taste is different. Everybody likes different things. Everything resonates differently with different people. So one of the notes that you mentioned was, and I want to get your take on it, was how the taste in this this I don't even know how to say the word neuroaesthetics, I believe is what it was. And elaborate a little bit on that and talk about that type of thing, because that really made sense to me when you explained it, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a really good reason, like, why we can't explain certain things, because certain people are just attracted to different things."
I think the best way to think about it is there are many times in life where you can say that hits different, or ooh, that like that. We don't know what we mean when we say it hits different. That's a new science. The science is called neuroaesthetics. It is considered an experimental science because we know so little about it. As far as I can tell, we are going increasingly so to need to connect to the human spirit. I think we can. I'm addicted to my phone. I think I know a lot of people have problems looking at the screen time reports on their phone. It seems like we are going in a direction where sticking true to whatever it is that appeals to you is what reminds you of being human. And again, we just don't understand what that is, because something that hits different in 2015 will not hit in the same way that it hits in 2023. I mean, you could just observe this by looking at the evolution of subgenres. What hits today might not hit tomorrow. I think that's a good way of thinking about it, because even let's say we get to a point where we can map out what would have hit 5 minutes ago. That's still 5 minutes ago. That's not 5 minutes from now, unless we understand, again, sociology,
Mhm,
upbringing, the entire human psyche.
mhm.
As far as I can tell, is what we need to understand in order to understand why certain art resonates the way it does. We barely understand the brain. How can we pretend that we are going to understand tastes
Right, and
when tastes are an extreme?
we have to,
Sorry.
yeah, like,
Oh, yeah.
tastes are completely, uh derived from what we were talking about earlier in the show, which is, where we grew up, the traumas that we experienced, the people that we were influenced by, the music, the shows, advertising, the toys that the food that we like, all of this stuff factors in, and every single person on this planet that has ever lived has never lived the same life. There's no way. Everybody has had different experiences. They're sure that you find people that like a lot of similar things, and you could put them in a bucket of like, you give them 10 things, and if you get eight of them, like most of the people to like eight out of the 10 things, most of these people like these types of things. Why do they like these types of things? What resonates with them, those types of things? And I think this data, I mean, obviously with marketing, this is such a huge thing, because as musicians, we have to understand, and artists, we have to understand what resonates with our audience and with the people that are going to listen to and support our career, whether that be through buying tickets, buying merch, making donations, streaming the music, buying vinyl, CDs, whatever that may be, and understanding what that is. But also understanding that there's no physical possible way that we are going to be able to understand the entire human psyche of every single person on this planet to be able to make formulated decisions. And I don't think that is realistic, but we can get a very, very strong understanding based on these data points and history that we have now. I think on the contrary of what you were mentioning earlier is what hits, today might not hit, or what hit 10 years ago might not hit today. But I think on the converse side, there are some songs that I have that I've listened to 10 years ago that actually hit twice as hard now, because that void that I have been missing, like I go to Skrillex because Skrillex is like just the goat of everything. He's just incredible and he's really good. It's really easy to point out his history, where Skrillex was the music he was making 10 years ago is very different than the stuff he's making now. And I think some of the harder stuff, the heavier stuff that he was known for 10 years ago is actually kind of a void that we've been missing now. I think now we just have so
Yeah.
much music that is just all slammed with the same samples, completely clipped and limited to there's no dynamics or anything. And it's just it's built for clubs and festivals. Whereas 10 years ago, that there was really a lot of thought and engineering going in behind it. And I think there are songs that do better now because we're missing that void. There might be something that we're trying to bring in and fill that void because we miss it, versus, oh, that's just not relevant today because it already happened, so I can't enjoy it anymore.
I think a good way to think about it, and maybe this is straying from what you mean. I would be interested if this is something you agree
Fire
or
away.
disagree with, but it feels like what you just mentioned, Skrillex 10 years ago. There was a lot of art that came as a result, and this is not. I shouldn't be picking on Skrillex at all. This is something that you just observe in any genre. This is how genres evolve, in
Yes,
my opinion. It
absolutely.
is conversational.
Mhm.
Like if you are inspired by something, if something resonates with you, you probably want to share that feeling with more people,
Yes.
which is the incentive for creating art that is somewhat derivative. Like if it's the new Rick Rubin book. I know this is a thing that people treat as the Bible, and I'm definitely one of those people. But the first 10 minutes is basically saying you filter ideas as an artist. You are sharing the ideas that you are having a conversation with every artist that has come before you, and you are laying the groundwork for the artists that come after you. So if something really resonates and people, to the point that people say, let me make my art similar to this because I want this to resonate with this, whatever we are talking about. Maybe this is a subgenre. Maybe this is just a specific way that a mix is presented. This could mean so many different things. But I would argue that a lot of the reason that art like that resonates right now is because it kicked off a movement almost. Movement is not the right word. That sounds a bit more dramatic than I mean. But yeah, I guess the conversational part is
I think maybe movement or a
the
shift
best way to think about it.
maybe would be a good word as well, like a good shift to something different.
The mind is really, at the end of the day, what an instrument is meant to communicate with.
Mm.
Like if you're using a musical instrument, you are doing it as a means to an end.
Mm-hmm.
For a while now, for like thousands of years, if you wanted to engage in that process, you would have to learn. There would be a very, very significant learning curve. In the context of vocals, there's a plateau. I can't sound like Ariana Grande. I just, it's not possible for me to sound like Ariana Grande. Musical instruments in the first place were derivative of voices. I can't tell you with 100% confidence that this is fully accurate because I was not there, but I would imagine that a large percentage of people who have been instrumentalists in the past 2,000 years were instrumentalists because they couldn't sound like Ariana Grande. They knew that those people were better at filling that role than they are. The conversations about barrier to entry are so interesting right now. And I feel like you have a lot of guests that would be relevant for this. I know there's so much discourse about how Spotify has like 100,000, 200,000 new tracks uploaded per day.
It's like 110,000 or something like that. It's insane.
110,000 songs that are uploaded per day. And I would argue that we are still in the period of time when we are in the instrument era. The barrier to entry to creating art is only in the beginning of being lowered, and yet there are already 110,000 tracks uploaded to Spotify every single day.
That's a good point.
So if we don't realize how many more people can be creating art by there being a lower barrier to entry, we don't know what that will mean. I know if you are a hosting platform and you're getting 110,000 songs every day, I'm sure that is frustrating. No one listens to most of them. I know that that is true. Art is not an egalitarian field.
Mm-hmm.
But if there are more people participating in it, if at the end of the day, art is a way of detecting what resonates, and there are more people trying to filter out what it is that resonates, I'm excited by that. That feels like the beginning of like a musical renaissance is way too dramatic of a word. So I'm not even going to allude to it, even though I just did. But the fact that you don't need to focus on the means, and by means, that could mean learning to play an instrument, learning to sing, learning how to record. We're only in the beginning of understanding what that means. And there's something empowering about that. I always not talk, but I always think about when I am working with Emvoice, getting into Ableton in 2011, I was probably making the best ideas of my life because I was like 12 at the time. You are like that feels like a period of time when I'm probably making music that is not as derivative as when you are twice that age, because you're really interacting with just your mind. Mm-hmm. I never finished those songs because I had an idea maybe in my head for a vocal. Mm-hmm. And maybe, there were a few songs. What I would do when I was in 7th grade, I would make like 7 million Ableton tracks, and then maybe one of them I would say, okay, I feel like this could use a vocal. Let me get a MIDI piano and then perform each syllable of the vocals and then try to show it to someone and hope they follow my lyrics that I write down with the MIDI piano that I'm entering and pick up on where each note should be performed, because I just hated singing that much. It feels like that pain point is going away. Mm-hmm. And I'm not limiting this to Emvoice by any means. There are so many insane technologies that have manifested over the course of this year and have become adopted. UberDuck, Respeecher, all of what you're seeing on the voice conversion, voice cloning world. That is insanely empowering. And I have nothing but respect for those people. I'm just very excited to find out what that entails for art, because again, it feels like that the 12-year-old who's getting into music production, who hasn't been able to communicate those ideas previously, they're probably going to be able to now. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I think music it kind of goes back to, I have a cousin who is autistic, and he was able to run a computer like at 2 years old. Before he learned how to speak, he was able to go on, turn a computer on, open up a web browser, go to the website that had internet games, and then he would play those games long before he knew how to talk. So that's kind of how I
Yeah.
feel musicians do the same thing is they know what they want to say, they know what they want to do, but they don't know how to communicate it until they just do it. So
Exactly.
them communicating is trying to sit there and tell you what the song is about is very different than them just going writing a song in putting those emotions into 3 minutes or 4 minutes, however long the song is, and saying, "Here, this is what I want to say." And it's got the emotions attached to it, it's got the lyrics, it's got the effects, it's got the ambience, it's got all of the feelings that can really kind of set the mood to really give the listener or the receiver a full experience of what they were trying to say. And I think that's really the beauty of any form of art, whether that's music, it's painting, it's a hobby that you really enjoy, photography, videography, whatever it may be that you find artistic and love. If you're able to do that and create whatever you want and then show it and it communicates exactly the feelings and story and message that you're trying to convey, I think that's what makes a really good artist. And, I think there was another point that I was gonna go back to that you had mentioned, and I had forgotten what it was, but, that was yeah, so oh, I know what it was. Um, so what you were talking about is there's so much stuff coming out these days. There's so much it's so easy to open up GarageBand on an iPad. I mean, who doesn't have an iPad or even an iPhone? Who doesn't have a phone these days to open up GarageBand and start creating music? So like you were saying, the barrier of entry for creating music is significantly lower than it was 20 years ago because we literally have walking computer devices in our pockets and we can create music on the fly. Um, so I think on the flip side, there is a negative to that because some artists will say, well, 110,000 songs uploaded to Spotify, Apple Music, whatever, a day is a lot. How the hell am I going to be found and heard? Like, what am I supposed to do? So I think that creates a lot of saturation. I think having the barrier of entry really low invites a lot of people in, but it also creates a lot of market saturation. And people who don't know what they're doing, like for example with copyrights, I did a really in-depth blog post on this a
Mm.
couple weeks ago, where they are just they're gaming Spotify's system. These really up and coming artists, and what they're doing is when they distribute a song, they're tagging their favorite artists. So then when it gets released,
Hmm.
they have like an Alan Walker collaboration where Alan Walker has like 10 million followers on Spotify. So what's going to happen is that small artist who's releasing his favorite song, his first song ever, he's going to tag in DistroKid or wherever they're distributing the music, they tag the artist and then it gets released on their release radar. And then so this small artist is getting all of the streams from Alan Walker's fans clicking on it and streaming and getting those streaming royalties. And I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people trying to come in and game the system because they don't understand what the rules are in here. So it's kind of turning into a Wild West. However, on the flip side, I agree that I like the barrier of entry being lower because everybody is creative to some degree. You have everybody's creative if you allow it yourself. So I think having the tools like GarageBand and those types of tools to easily create and get ideas out that you can inspire other people is very important. And I think everybody should have that ability to do that. But on the flip side, I think it makes it more difficult for artists who are really trying to share a message and connect with people when they're getting buried by all of this fluff, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense. Are you familiar with what Grimes has done recently with her?
Yes.
I really like that idea. So, for those who don't know, Grimes is licensing her voice through an AI generated platform that her and her team have used, and they are allowing artists to basically upload their own top lines, and the software that Grimes has created that is trained on her voice then takes your voice and turns it into a Grimes collaboration. And then you're able to use, instead of your voice or whatever voice you submitted, you can use Grimes's voice in your song. And then when you distribute that song through, they've partnered with TuneCore now to distribute the songs. You're able to do a 50-50 split on the sound recording, which is amazing. So when you upload and distribute your song, 50% of the stream on if you get a stream on Spotify from that song, 50% of it will go to you and 50% will go to Grimes, just for using her voice, which I think is really, really cool. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, and if you know any more about this type of thing, since you're kind of in this world, or what do you think of it just in general? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad?
I am inspired by it because it is solving the same types of issues that we are trying to solve. We are all after the same goal, which is empowering people
Yes.
with the power of the voice. Maybe that sentence will be articulated differently depending on
Yeah.
the specific technology, but that's always the core of what the aim is.
Mm-hmm.
Those technologies require existing audio. So if you want to sound like Grimes, you need to give it a recording that can be converted into sounding like Grimes.
Mm-hmm.
Emvoice's technology is slightly different in the sense that you don't record any actual audio.
Mm-hmm.
You're just entering notes, entering lyrics, and hearing it played on the spot. So I would consider us adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's a good word to describe
Yeah.
whatever you want to call this world. We're solving the same issues.
It's a Grimes has a Phillips screwdriver. You guys have the flathead screwdriver. They're both the same tool, just used similar different ways.
Yeah, that's a very good way of thinking about it. And I feel like the effects that Grimes has done a very good job of outlining, both in interviews and both in suggesting this in the way she goes about output. It feels like production, and maybe this is a bit of a side note, but it feels like for a while, 10, 20, this millennium, there's been songwriters and there's been producers.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you would be a songwriter and a producer. Maybe you would just be a songwriter. Maybe you would just be a producer. I can comment on production more closely than I can on songwriting, but I'm sure similar patterns exist. If you are a producer, you are probably being an arrangement producer and a sound design producer at the same time, because that's just kind of the again, there's songwriters and producers. That seems to be somewhat of a binary, and it has been for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if, maybe not one, that's not the best way of putting this, but it feels like part of what Grimes is very good at doing is pointing out that maybe there are producers who are better at focusing on arrangement specifically and then passing that along to sound designers. If you look at a lot of producers right now, their emphasis tends to be sound design or arrangement. And people already complement each other. If you look at popular songs, there's so many examples of this. Arrangement producers, songwriting producers. And it feels like we're finally getting to a place where that distinction is a bit more obvious, making it a bit more easy to tap into. Maybe another way of putting this is it feels like a lot of producers have been put in the producer stereotype isn't the right word, but when you think of producer, something comes to your head. Mm-hmm. I do wonder how many producers are more like songwriters in the sense that they arrange the song than they focus. I feel like a lot of producers have more to do with, there has to be a third category. I feel like songwriting and arrangement, production arrangement, and sound design are entirely different topics. And I feel like if nothing else, that distinction is being allowed to exist right now.
Yeah.
As a result of technologies like that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Maybe there's a clear way of articulating that, but hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, I think I mean, when you say producer, songwriter, whatever it may be, there's a really fine line between what that is, because it's one of those, I don't know what it's exactly called, but when you say it's like when you say certain words and they become so used that they don't really have meaning anymore. It's like when somebody says, "Oh my gosh, I'm having an anxiety attack." It's like when you just say that, but the real definition of an anxiety attack is like you're struggling breathing, you like, and then they say, "Oh, I'm having a panic attack." Like panic attack, you're in the hospital, like you're like legit panicking. But when somebody just says, "Oh, I'm having a panic attack, I'm so nervous. What am I going to do before this interview?" Like that's not a panic attack. So I feel like producer has kind of
Yeah.
the same thing. Producer songwriter has kind of been the same thing. And the definition of a producer has kind of been just kind of dwindled down to basically a beat maker. And I think that's the biggest distinction for me is if you're in your digital audio workstation working with music and you're not doing anything else, you're considered a beat maker technically. A producer is somebody who is, think of it like a film producer. A film producer is overseeing an entire project. They're coordinating the recording engineers, the sessions, they're picking out which songwriters are coming in, they're picking out which vocalists, they're overseeing which recording engineer. They're producing the whole thing. And I think the definition that gets interchanged when people are writing music is when you produce something, you're producing a good, you're creating something. I think that gets interchanged with being a music producer. There are
Hmm.
beat makers who specifically make beats, and then there are songwriters who write the songs. And yes, beat makers can be songwriters because sometimes lyrics and melodies and whatnot are considered, songwriting things. They are considered that. So a beat maker can be a songwriter and vice versa. But I think the term producer is a bit more involved because it involves like overseeing the entire project and literally producing it, overseeing like who the recording engineer is, who's writing the music, who the songwriters are, who's collaborating, who the vocalists are, those types of things. So I think there are some distinctions, but I do also agree that there is going to be a blend and like a deviation. I think that needs to happen because I'm kind of in that boat of where my specialty is the beat making. I can create music, I can arrange it, and I can make a ton of beats all day long. But asking me to write the lyrics or anything like that, it's really where I struggle. It's harder for me. So I want somebody to fill that void. So creating a technology like Grimes has done to fill that void is something for me to like look into and be like, okay, this is really cool. However, then it comes into all the legal implications. It's like if I use her voice, do I have admin publishing rights? Can I place it in syncs?
Hmm.
Does it have to be cleared by her team? Like those are the like it just gets into all of this stuff. But I do love the technology that is being created, like what Grimes has done, and basically open sourcing all of her intellectual property, which is not something that artists do these days. Um, because it their IP makes them money. It's what makes them their money. So for Grimes to just open it up is opening a can of worms, but it's very very interesting, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And creating these tools that will fill in those voids is going to be a very interesting sector of technology in the next, I would say, 5-10 years, especially.
It's going to be very interesting to watch how models change because it's very much experimental, early energy right now. Mvoice's model is we have agreements in place with our vocalists. You can release music commercially using Mvoice. It is cloud based, meaning that if we have to worry about people using it in the context of hate speech or uh, malintent,
Sure.
the fact that it is cloud, we can kick people from access to the service,
Mm.
which has allowed us to get vocalists to agree to something like this. If people find out, hey, people are using my voice to commit crimes, that's going to be a problem. If you can enforce those, if you can punish people for attempting, that kind of helps. Um, were you about to say something?
No, I just
So
like
I was going to completely change the topic again.
yeah, my mind just goes to like all of the legal implications of using somebody's
Yeah.
synthesized voice. Like, can I do it? What are the implications? What did they agree to with this service? What does this service allow you to do? And just in general, what does copyright law allow you to use? And what are you able to do with somebody's synthesized voice that they've previously agreed to do? And how are they going to make money? Like if I gave Mvoice my singing voice, which probably would shut you down because everybody like, what the hell is this? Um, if I gave you that voice and somebody starts using it for something else and making a lot of money off of that, well, I want some of that money because that's technically my voice. But what are the implications? Like, what are the rules? So I think it opens up. The technology is really cool, but there's a lot that needs to be thought about as the technology continues to open up. And I think right now it is going so fast that it is causing
Yeah.
it's going way too fast. And I'm getting pitches like every day for new companies starting up, and this company's doing this, and this company's partnering with this company. Excuse me. And there is just so much going on that it's so hard to keep up with who's doing
Yeah.
what.
I can very much resonate with that.
Yeah.
It's I would recommend, maybe, I feel like you've probably looked at this, but the idea of artists creating their own APIs is
Mm,
something that comes to mind based off what we
mm,
were just talking about. And if I'm kind of backtracking here, but you mentioned something about you are good as a beat maker and not as good as a lyricist. I probably should have cut you off when you mentioned this, because I know I'm kind of backtracking, but I do wonder if that is an access issue, in the sense that maybe the reason I'm not good at lyricism. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm good at songwriting, but I'm pretty sure I've gotten better at it this year
mm,
as a result of being able to interact with it more.
mm,
I just wonder how much this kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, but the songwriter person being the one who can sing, and then the producer person being the one who makes everything else because they don't like to sing. Um, Not having to work in that setting, I feel like it's going to allow a lot of producers to flex whatever the creative muscle of songwriting is,
mhm,
and probably a lot of songwriters to flex whatever the production muscle is.
mhm.
And there's something kind of exciting about that. Maybe that was what I meant way earlier when we were talking about this. I feel like that's just, if there's anything to be excited about on the creative side, it feels like that's definitely one of them.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe this is going on a tangent. This is very much a can of worms. This is something that we could talk about for a while, I imagine. But it feels like the voice was the original instrument, and anything after that was derivative of it. And that's been over thousands of years. Like, at this point, we listen to songs and hear a saxophone. People say the saxophone is the closest instrument to the voice. The reason we have beautiful saxophone solos over the course of the past 150 years, the history of saxophone solos, is because, to an extent, that was not an idea that could communicate by saxophonists using their own voice.
Mhm.
If we are going back to that now, if the missing piece has been the vocal, and we're finally crossing whatever we want that boundary to be, we're going full circle. Like, we're almost going back to our roots in some way.
Mhm.
Because human music is vocal. I mean, this is the voice. This is the voice. This is the instrument I am born with. um, and I don't know. I guess there's just something kind of exciting about not knowing
No,
what that'll lead to.
there's you make a really good point, because the human voice is an instrument. In theory, every voice has a melody, every voice has a tempo, every voice has a rhythm. Everything you say, there's a rhythm to it. You could literally put down on a piece of sheet music, and you could write out the notes that you're singing in on the ledger, or the that you're speaking, and you could write them out on the staff and say, like, okay, this is an F, this is an A, in the rhythm that you said them. And so the voice is naturally rhythmic and musical. So it's just a matter of finding what instruments can complement that. Sometimes it's drums, sometimes it's a saxophone, sometimes it's a synth, sometimes it's a violin. And everybody's timbre of their voice fits different songs. Like Christina Aguilera probably would not be good for an opera piece. Although she has one hell of a voice, there's just different styles that the voice goes into, and I think people are finding those pockets to do that. But that's
And they've been limited often to whatever pockets their own voice fits into, or the people whose voices they have access to
But a lot of
fit into.
artists
And
too, like when they have ideas, what do? They open up their phone and they record a voice note. They turn their voice and create a melody using their voice. And then they get to the computer and they turn that melody into whatever instrument or sound that they could ever imagine. Anything they want.
and whatever it was that inspired them to open that voice memo app in the first place, is whatever they are striving towards creatively. And we just don't know what that is.
Yeah.
If I have an idea that enters my head for a vocal top line, I don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And again, I'm kind of going back to the whole Rick Rubin world by saying this, I guess. But if all of the barriers to entry are gone, that's what we are left with, is whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what that is. We don't know when ideas enter your mind. We don't know where that is coming from. And maybe I alluded to this. Maybe I've said this worded differently before, but that's the thing that just makes me so optimistic about creativity and art right now. Is yes, the instruments are going to change, and we don't know how they're going to change, but it's going to make it more fundamental. You are going to be interacting way more directly with whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that if you are interacting with that way more directly, that creative consciousness, whatever you want to call that, I imagine that being more closely in front of that
Mm-hmm.
can lead to very interesting art.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I know there's issues with enforcement. I know that there's going to be many hiccups and challenges along the way. But if that is what the end result is, I'm excited by that.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree with that as well. I think too, a lot of artists, when they create that voice memo and they have that idea, they don't even know where it's coming from. And the beauty of it is being able to, once you have that idea and you've created something, even if nothing ever comes to you as to why that happened or what it is, you can create whatever you want. If that story didn't have something to record, when it's done, you can create a story around it. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
There's so much flexibility to, if it doesn't convey the emotion right away, later on, as you're working through the piece and getting inspiration and putting the puzzle together, it starts forming a story. It starts connecting with different parts of your life or different moments or memories or ideas. And from there, you generate a story. That's kind of how I do a lot of my songs. They come out and I'm just liking the sounds and where it's going and the direction. And I don't really think about the story as I'm creating it, because that's not going to help me create the music. Like, that's not going to help me get the ideas out. Like, well, what do I want to happen here? Why should this happen? It's just, no, it sounds cool. Just go with it. And then after,
There's a reason it's studio session, not just studio, because
yes,
the time of that session is so crucial to whatever the output of it is. If you finish half a song and you pick up on it later, you are not in whatever that mode of being, whatever that session, whatever that inspiration is anymore.
mm-hmm, absolutely.
I totally cut you off. You were in the middle of a sentence right there, and I'm going to blame the latency every time I've been cutting you off. It is not me trying to cut you off. It is the Wi-Fi. I just need to say that because I feel like I've done it multiple
No,
times.
that's good. No, I appreciate that, because it's how normal dialogue goes, and cutting off. And if there's something that you say that's interesting, jump in. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think that the beauty with art is being able to create a story after the fact. There doesn't need to be a story. So I just want to do a quick time check in. We've been talking for over an hour. I've said a lot of what I needed to say. So if there's anything that you want to say, as we kind of wrap things up here in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to pass it over to you, and feel free to throw it over. And then once you're done, we'll wrap it up.
I think a good closing thought, and I think this is a good closing thought because I don't know if I fully understand it yet, and I just kind of want to throw it out there, I guess, is the idea that everyone is evolving into a DJ. Everyone that is a creative. In music, this might be literal. It might literally just be, I wonder what a DJ set is going to look like in 10 years. I have absolutely no idea. For the past 10, it's been more or less compiling a vibe It has been taking details from one song and blending them with another. The whole instrumental of song A, vocal of song B, build up into song C approach is almost a reflection of what we were kind of talking about earlier with creativity being a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You're always borrowing ideas from other people. If you know an edit, I love this time of the year, by the way, because it's the time of the year where you'll see a DJ performs an edit at Tomorrowland or something like that. And then you know that edit because of that artist.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're playing an instrumental from a song that is on their label and a vocal from a song that it just everybody knows, and building that into something which is the bass line from one song, the melody of another. All of those four songs are individual songs, possibly in the context of a DJ set. But the DJ's presentation of combining them, you remember the edit that DJ made because that DJ made it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's just a bit more, I feel like that holds a bit more value than we realize, because it feels like that's the direction we're headed in a lot of ways. Or if there's a mindset to have when it comes to working on things as the barriers to entry get lower, it feels like that's a good mindset. And I don't even just mean that in music. I can't really comment on examples of this as clearly as I can in other industries, but they definitely exist. Maybe artists always have been DJs.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, in the sense that you are inspired by ideas that have come before you, you will probably include those songs in your set.
Mm-hmm.
And you're paving the path for the next generation of DJs, because the best DJs sets will be viewed by that upcoming generation, and that conversation will continue. I just feel like that whatever that process is, and I'm sure there are people out there who maybe would be good at, as a guest on this podcast, that are experts in whatever it is that I'm talking about here. It feels like that's a good mindset to think of in the context of how art will evolve.
That's a really good point. I really like that.
Okay. I'm thinking of the best way to word this. All of art might just be a back-to-back DJ set, and the artists with the most impactful art are the people that stay on the decks for the longest.
That's a really
okay. That's it. I'm happy. That's the sentence that I've been working towards for the past hour, I guess.
That's a good way to grand slam it. The end of the episode. Yeah, that was good. Cool. So, Jacob, thank you so much for being on the show. This was such a really good conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's so refreshing to have a different format of conversation, because I come on here and I oftentimes talk a lot about a lot of the same things, and sometimes things get very repetitive, but I really enjoy having these types of one-off conversations that are very different than like the educational, like typical business suit and tie type thing. Like there's a lot of philosophy and moments that people relate to, and getting down to like the human element of it, because I've had so many songwriters and artists on here, and they talk about their processes all day long, but no artist process is the same as another artist. Like it's all completely different. So having these philosophical conversations really kind of gives, I think, everybody some food for thought and things to talk about. And quite frankly, these are some of my favorite conversations, is to have these types of discussions, because I think very similar to like you is these kind of big scheme moments. Like, how are we seeing like an overarching theme? How can we kind of use that as a projection of like what's to come, what is to come, what's happening now that's going to shape the future? I think all of these are really important conversations.
I'm very interested to see how this ages too, because I feel like anything I'm saying right now is I'm saying this on July 20th, 2023, and I have no idea whether or not I will be feeling the same way a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. We will find out, but I'm interested to see how time treats this episode.
Yeah, for sure. And we might have a Kate Bush moment with this podcast, where in 40 years, somebody's like, damn, this podcast, this one, just resonated.
It'll be 4 months from now, not 40 years.
Not 40 years. Yeah, that's true. Well, Jacob, thank you so much for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with you and reconnecting as well after so many years of kind of being connected passively, but actually coming in, like sitting at the table and having a conversation. It's always fun to do that and catch up. So thank you for your
Yeah, I'm
time.
happy to be here.
Before I let you
Thank
go,
you.
can you shout out, like, how can the listeners follow you or Emvoice or anything that you are working on? How can they keep up with you? Or if they have any other questions?
Yeah, for Emvoice, all of the social media handles are Emvoice app. So M as in Michael, VoiceApp as in application. Emvoiceapp.com, and then Emvoice app is the handle for Instagram, Twitter. Those are our most active. Instagram is very much where Emvoice lives at the moment, but it's also the same on TikTok and Facebook. My personal account would, I guess, just be my Instagram, which is Jacob Alexander MCC.
Cool.
Those are about all the handles that I have to plug.
Sure. Cool. And I'll link them all in the show notes below, so it's easy for everybody to access them.
Amazing.
So Jacob, thanks again for being on the show. It was great to have you. And yeah,
It's great to
definitely
be
would
here.
love to have you back on the show again in the future.